Hi everyone. So today I'm going to be having a chat with John Lennon. Michael Beers.
This is
Oh,
my
lenses are a
my
bit.
glasses transition lenses. I was outside a little bit ago. I didn't think you were actually going to say that.
I'm never joking, Michael. Never joking. but but how have you been? What's new with you, other than, of course, this magnificent book?
Oh, my goodness gracious, what has been new? Oh, I've been applying to graduate programs in philosophy. I'm interested in getting a master's in philosophy and going from there. So I've been applying to a few universities, and I'm just waiting back to hear from them. In the meantime, I've just been working. I've been doing a lot of reading. And yeah, whenever people ask me this question, I always have trouble thinking of thinking of what actually is new with me. I'm always thinking of the books I've been reading and not of the actual physical things I've been doing. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but what's been new with you? You got
Well,
married and stuff.
yeah.
Um,
Married, house. Well, just actually, I think, was I in the role I was in when I last spoke to you? So probably actually it's new job, new house, new
yeah,
wife. Yes,
yeah.
pretty much everything.
Knew
Everything
everything. I
kind of.
believe you were engaged last time we talked, or maybe
Yeah,
she was just your girlfriend. I can't remember, but
yeah. You're right. I think I'd recently gotten engaged,
yeah,
and I was still in my old role. I don't think I'd moved yet. So yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
wonderful. I'm still in the same spot for now, but that'll hopefully change this coming fall when I hear back from the university. So, um, but I think it's time for a change. But
Yeah.
still in the same room. As I think people will
Yeah.
be able to compare the two videos and see, oh, there's the blue wall and
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, and I've got these weird blotches on my wall. We need to redecorate it. You should
I
see the
wasn't
bed
going to
of
say
my
anything.
bedroom. My bedroom's appalling. Utterly appalling. Some sort of modern art sort of thing, and we just.
Are you in your bedroom right now, or
No, I'm in the second bedroom, which is
ah?
it's more of a storage facility, as you can see.
Oh, I see. Oh my
Yes,
goodness.
it's awful. We need to open up the loft, and then we can move things up. We need the loft ladder, but Zara thinks the loft ladder is too expensive. This is the second. This is the storage room for now. This is
Okay.
our loft for the time being.
Well,
Yeah.
you framed your picture very nice. I half expected
Oh.
it to just be like blank walls when you turned the camera. But
Just no, nothing exists outside
there's
of this
nothing
screen.
exists outside.
It's just it just becomes I don't
You're on
know
like a studio
yeah,
set.
exactly. It becomes a Berkeley thought experiment, I imagine. But yeah, I've been really looking forward to talking to you about Motes and Beams. I
Yeah.
would recommend, by the way, if anyone hasn't gotten this book already, I strongly recommend buying it. It really goes in depth in the ideas of Jung, bringing some other influences which aren't typically discussed around Jung. Say Buddhist philosophy goes into the idea of, say, I Ching. There's lots of other concepts that flow into this, which is very interesting and eclectic to read through. And the idea of motes and beams, of course. I was thinking, what do you mean by motes and beams? And I realized it was the biblical reference with the
Yes.
yes, not don't judge the mote in someone else's eye when you have a beam in your own. So
Hmm.
it's a good one there. It's but I would say, what first of all led you to want to write this book?
Well, I think I've said this to a
Mm.
few people before. I learn best, I think, when I have a project and I feel like I need to write something that other
Mm.
people are going to read, because that forces me to really think through um, what I'm thinking and be able to articulate it and present it. So I I've
Mm.
started a lot of writing projects, and this was basically the first one that I would consider fully finished that I ever like all the way to publication. You know, there's other smaller things, I suppose, but um, yeah, I started that years ago. I don't know why I decided maybe I would try writing a book. I don't think I took it seriously at first. It was more just an exercise to get my ideas out. I wanted to format them and in some sense kind of try to do what I did with my original videos on the channel, the very first ones I put up, where I just tried to go through step by step. I wanted to try doing that again with all the new info that I had learned, and so that's kind of where it started. And then just snowballed as I became more serious about it and realized, oh, I could probably actually do this maybe.
I'm just amazed at the sort of the influences you're bringing in, how you reached into almost Native American creation myths to set out the formation of the psyche in terms of the four function stack, and it's just really interesting how you delve into
that. It I don't know how to describe that. It was kind of like well, here, this might help to explain. So I'm going to turn the camera a bit. So my room, I have a, wait, I need to turn it this way. Here, I'll just give you a brief tour. What I'm showing you is all my books. So I have, you can kind of see there, and then I go around here and I have that shelf, and then I've got these shelves here. So the reason I'm showing you that is because I have a problem where I go to used bookstores and I just pick up lots of books because they're all like, you know, $2 a pound or something, you know, something like this. And I just find so many things that, you know, so many philosophical books, and I just try to read them. I haven't read most of them through at all. Like there's very few which I think I've actually completed, but I'll read large portions of them. And when I was working on the book, what would happen is I would just be reading, I would just pick something at random from the shelf and I would be reading it, and I would just start seeing, oh, this might be some personality stuff here. And I would just, it's like I was in a mode and I would see all the patterns show up, and then I would be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it would almost like I'd go into a bit of a panic where I'd be like, oh my gosh, I haven't put this source in my book. People will think I'm such a fool if I haven't read this thing. I didn't like really think that, but a little part in me was like, you have to put this into the book and this in there. And because this illustrates this amazingly, and you'll look so smart if you can reference this. And so, you know, but I really did see the patterns. Also, it was intentional for me to reference so many sources because that was a part of, you know, I have all these books because I do have a genuine love for learning and for all of these different figures. I love typology because I love the people of the past that it puts me into contact with. And so I sort of wrote the book relishing the opportunity to, excuse me, to quote and to show all these different great men and women of the past and ideas, and sort of bring them together as kind of my own little, what's the right word? I suppose celebration or a homage to a lot of these figures. And that's kind of how I would like to write a lot of books in the future, is to be able to bring in quotes from all these people, because the quotes will just come to mind. I would be writing about the INFJ and I would be like, and it's kind of like this thing, and I'd remember something I read like a year ago. Like, I don't know why my memory would work that way. But when writing the book, it just kind of helped me in that way. And then I'd go to my bookshelf and I'd grab the book and I'd find, and then that would remind me of another thing. And so I really like that aspect of the book, because I like all of these thinkers. I want to be unbearably well read by the time I die. I want to. So anyway.
It definitely shows that you can definitely see the different voices of the past lending their ideas to the building of the different profiles we're putting together in these types. It's just articulating the ideas going through, and it's such a broad range. You got, well, let's see, you got Ralph Waldo Emerson, you got Camille Paglia, you have Ayn Rand, Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, Marx, Hume, and
so, everybody. Zizek, this is as many people as possible. I think there's a page, I can't remember if this is quite, I think there's a page where I literally I like quote Jesus and Marquise de Sade on like the same page or something. I don't think that's quite true.
Did I see I can't remember Marquis de Sade coming.
I quote, I do quote, I talk about him in the ESTP section.
Oh, okay, that might be why I was running out of time, so I didn't.
Yeah, I don't quote him.
Yeah.
I mention him in one other spot, and I quote
Okay.
him there because I don't normally care to speak of the Marquis de Sade, but anyway, but again, it's like I'm bringing in everybody, and I'm not quoting from his works there. I'm quoting from his letters, which but we don't need to get into Sade.
No,
we don't need to get into that.
Fair enough. But you're using him as an example of the ESTP.
Yes,
right.
Yes. Of elements of the ESTP, and then I try to counter it with more positive elements or positive role models, you could say. But
it makes sense. And also, I did find you. Well, I realized how you also explored for, as you call them, the theocratic types. Both the desire to do good in the world, the desire to have that positive impact, but also the potential to decline into, as it were, as you call it, fascism, which I think is certainly shows that sort of very broad, that diversity of ways in which that type can surface. And I know that in your book, sort of one of the foundational ideas is bringing in, I think it's the idea almost that I think this is something which actually influenced me greatly in my framing of the quadras, is talking about, say, what we call alpha versus gamma, and this idea that one is highly individualistic and the other is highly collectivistic, which you've framed as the monarchic and the democratic groupings. And I feel that's certainly for me, that really helped me for understanding how these types differ, what are the things I'm trying to see here, and how they actually are clashing, as it were, in their perspectives.
Yes. Just whenever someone is like, I was influenced by this idea, I'm like, I have succeeded. I have made a difference in some way. I remember that's what we were talking about the last time. We were talking about the circle, and that actually talking about it with you. I think at that time was when I was writing and working out that section of the book. So it was actually very helpful banging some of those ideas off of you. So you have influenced me as well. So,
and I saw my name in the appendix. I was
It was after that. It was after a conversation. I started listening to some of your videos, and I'm like, well, I need to put him in the acknowledgements as well. Like, especially because I was like, I really need to find a proper way to make sure people know, hey, socionics came up with a lot of these basic ideas way before I did. Like, and I figured some of them out just sort of from the logic of the system, and then realized, oh, they've already done this. Darn, I'm not as original as maybe I hoped, but then learned from that there. So I was like, okay, well, I'll put Jack Aaron there and give him a nice, and include socionics in there too. But yes, so you're welcome. It was a genuine acknowledgement.
Thank you. And I also, I'd say that idea, that contribution you made, I think, to the general Jungian conversation about individualism and extroversion, the idea, it's individualism and collectivism, the idea that it's not, initially people in sort of Western sociology were thinking about in terms of, okay, alphas and betas, so like your democratic and your theocratic, they're the collectivists, and gammas and deltas, so the anarchic and monarchic, are going to be the individualists. But what you did in that was really set out, no, to be truly individualistic, you need introverted intuition and extroverted sensation. And to be truly, and that's because there's this idea of standing out, of resisting attempts to assimilate you into the Borg. You can't be open to that. You have to be almost more closed minded in that respect. You can't be open, as you'll be sucked in, slightly, even partly. Something, an interesting parallel, one thing I've noticed when all these COVID restrictions were announced, some of the most compliant people, they weren't the gammas, they were the deltas. The deltas really complied. They tend to comply a lot with it. They wore their masks, they did this, they did that, because for them it's like, sure, I'm an individualist, but I don't want to actually create a ruckus in being an individualist. So go along with it and sort of trust the expertise, as it were. But it was
Yes.
the gammas were causing more of a noise, like, no, you can't make me do this. That sort of idea. And
Yes.
but also in the same way for betas. And I was, I often found when I was trying to describe beta earlier on in sort of almost a collectivist way, some betas responded quite negatively to that. Said, no, I don't see myself as being a collectivist. I like to stand out. I like to be, I don't want to be part of the crowd, as it were. I was thinking, okay, what is that about then? And I realized, because they got introverted intuition and extroverted sensation. So although they do collectivize, they don't want to jump into the pool with everyone else. They want to be sort of be the one to have created it. To stand out
Yeah. It's almost like they want to create the society that they can then be a part of in a certain sense, is one way of putting it. That's because I was sort of seeing a similar thing too, with the COVID restriction, because that's a can of worms right there. What was interesting? I suddenly realized maybe you know what, I'm sorry. I in good conscience, I probably shouldn't share that, because that's about somebody. They probably wouldn't want me to share that. So sorry, that was anticlimactic. But I tend to share too much. I'm like, this story about so and so. But anyway, well, I'm glad I've been able to help in that respect. I mean, and yeah, because that's just how. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry. You keep talking. You were saying interesting things. I can't think of anything.
Also, it led back to what there's one niggle I had about for reading the book.
Oh no, a dreaded niggle.
A niggle, but it's
please tell me.
What I mean by that is by the setting up of say the monarchic and democratic as like the central fulcrum. It leads to you describing the theocratic and democratic, so betas and deltas, as being almost like hybrids of two, which is true. Absolutely, they are hybrids of the two. But what do they also have that is essential to their own, which makes monarchic
the other two hybrids? Yeah. Now, I thought a bit about that, but I decided for the time being I would just leave it as is, and I figured people would, because I didn't see it as too much of a problem, and also it just followed neatly from the way I had structured the system. So, but I have thought about that, and I don't have an answer or a way to articulate it, but it would be delicious, as it were, to be able to talk about it in that way, to sort of reverse it a bit. But I'm not quite sure the way I've structured the system. I suppose it would need to be, it would have to be, I would have to switch, rather than focusing on I guess I'd have to create, in order to fit it into the system, I'd have to create new axes, almost in a sense, to organize things.
You have to go right back to very early in your work about when it comes to I Ching, because you move from 2 lines to 3 lines by introducing connotative, denotative. Which, interestingly, my friend, have you met Kimani?
I don't believe so. No.
He uses exactly that term, connotative, denotative, to differentiate between feeling and thinking, intuition and sensation. So he also uses that as well. And in general socioeconomics parlance, we use external, internal. And the other one, the sort of the counterpart to external, internal, is detached, involved. The idea of thinking, the reason why we say when we're thinking about something as opposed to feeling something.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that could either mean intuition or thinking.
Yeah.
Or feeling something. You can feel something physically, like a smack in the head, or you can feel something emotionally. And and that idea that sensing and feeling have something in common, and intuition have something in common. So you'd have to add in, as it were, a 4th line to the I Ching to then bring about this. I don't know. Would you have to bring out a 4th line to I Ching? Not sure. You'd need to have detached, involved to then bring about this idea that for well, essentially this idea that when it comes to alphas
I'd
and
have to
gammas,
relate sensation with feeling, which I don't talk about in the book. I set it up so that sensation and feeling are these opposites in my lovely little grids that I create. So in fact, that's what came to my mind when you were mentioning about the niggle. But I didn't quite see how it related at the moment. But yeah, I would need to show, and I've thought about that, and I want to say that Jung himself indicates, I don't know where, it's one of those little things I remember and I'd have to look up, but I want to say he himself noted that there was an odd similarity between those two, and an odd similarity between intuition and thinking. So I'm assuming that's what that other dichotomy you're describing is meant to try to talk about. Yeah.
The reason I sort of jumped way back to the beginning of the book after talking about something sort of more middle in the book, because I realized that that's a point not a lot of people are going to realize. Why did I just do that? There is something about the difference between alphas and gammas which relates to these very founding dichotomies. And I think it relates to the idea of a leaning towards detachment from society, from the rest of the world, from the influences that could be had upon you, versus involvement. So jumping right into the pool, becoming one with all. And whereas connotative, denotative, you often framed it as external, internal.
Yeah.
That would have linked, I would say, to the difference between theocratic and anarchistic, in that the way I think of it is, and we were talking about that you're talking about quite in the book about things which are quite set and things which are liable to be changing and being more receptive. And this idea that the theocratic is the one that changes society quite a lot, whereas the anarchic was more inclined to almost, no, I'm not changing society, we're all individuals in it.
Right.
And I think this idea that there is, both of them are about different kinds of change, but the polarity is opposite. So it's the idea of external versus internal, or denotative, connotative, which I think comes into play here, where betas, the theocratic types, are the ones that are engaging in external change. Oh, you're right. And deltas are engaging in internal change. Self-growth.
And that matches in nicely because at least the way I'm describing the theocratic, the beta, they are, I mean, sort of their hallmark is they are set. They've had, the way I describe it in the book, sort of metaphorically, is they've had their revelation. I always do this. I don't know why I do this, but they've had this revelation and they are set. They know this is, and when, if that's ever genuinely challenged and it gets shattered, it's like, huge existential crisis for the beta, and it's very difficult to do that, to actually shatter the basis of the revelation. And just as a side note, I suspect, and maybe I shouldn't say this so soon, but I think that might have happened with Jordan Peterson a bit when he did his thing with Zizek, because the one moment in that, I think this was almost serendipity or providence or something, that the only moment of that exchange that I myself saw live was I came in right at the moment when Zizek was saying, where are these Marxists that you keep pointing to? Where when he was saying that in his Zizek way. And it was like, I can't watch debates. I think I talked about this the last time. I can't do it. And I was like, okay, that's all I needed to hear. I just needed somebody to bring that up, because that was always one of the things that bothered me with Peterson. But I think his encounter with Zizek and kind of the realization, okay, you're not a Marxist. It's actually much more complicated. Have I been chasing demons? Like, I don't know. I've sensed a subtle change, and it's odd that I know it's not truly correlated, but it's just kind of odd symbolically that correlate, that right after that, more or less, was when he had the collapse physically from all of the other things going on, and then all the way going to Russia, and was basically dead, and then when brought back to life. I mean, because he was in that coma and everything. I don't mean to take this too seriously, but symbolically it's interesting.
My goodness, that is an idea.
and now he's back, and I remember, I think he's like become much more religious, more overtly religious, and
he was always more towards the faith side of things.
Yes.
So he kept it ambiguous. He wouldn't tell you whether he believed in God or not. But what I noticed was his wife Tammy made a very clear, distinct conversion to embracing Christianity, very much. And I think maybe he's just more gone along with it because I think she made the change. And also their daughter Michaela has recently also gone towards faith. So I haven't detected that same shift in him so much. What I did definitely detect was the complete breakdown of him. He looks almost 10 years older. It's just really taken a lot out of him, that illness.
And I think, assuming that he fits in the beta type, I think that could be an example of there was an element of, that was almost an element of the revelation he had the revelation he had received, as it were. Not that he would describe it that way, but he's like, I have to stop these Marxists from doing these things, and these are the things that they're doing. And then he confronts Zizek and realizes, wait, this maybe is, I kind of got called out on that. And then he has to, it's like, that was actually a moment where there was a crack in and he's, I think, begun reforming it, but maybe I'm reading too much into it. But
what I remember of that debate is that he went into it looking for a debate.
Yes.
And Zizek went into it not looking for a debate.
Yes.
It was having a discussion, an understanding. So he almost Peterson got caught up in whether it's his own framing or the framing he become part of and helped to influence of this idea, there are Marxists we need to actually have really bash heads together on. And it became a far more open discussion. I mean, once he realized there's going to be an open discussion, he adjusted to it. But at that time, it's like, I'm ready for a complete, battle of the century of the conservatives versus the Marxists against. Although saying that he wasn't even calling himself a conservative. There are a lot of people who, it's not just him. There are a number of people more towards, I would say, the right rather than left, but not necessarily. If they would have identified themselves more centre left, who are now quite clearly calling themselves conservatives. There's been some sort of shift in general in that sort of respect. But I think I wonder what I think is a very clear example of this sort of complete shift was Wittgenstein.
Yes. Because there are two periods for Wittgenstein. Pre, and then he writes the Tractatus, and then he is like, I'm done with philosophy, and then he comes,
and a completely different set of ideas afterwards, like the old Wittgenstein and new Wittgenstein. And Plato did a similar thing. Like there's suddenly it's like a whole different philosophy they're coming up with. And I think that it's that sort of traumatic break and reforming, completely rebuilding one's life, which I think is such a definitely a bit of beta. I'm not sure about Peterson. The two arguments for his type in the sociologists community are EIE and LIE. And I've typically lent towards the LIE, although being entirely aware of he's not your average mountain mover, you might say. He's he's far more emotive, far more as it were, far more neurotic in terms of his emotions than one would expect from a LIE. But it's more in terms of the expressed values he talks about, in terms of how he approaches his relationship with his wife. It does very much strike a chord in terms of what I'm used to interpreting as extroverted logic and introverted ethics, rather than introverted logic and extroverted ethics. So I'm wondering about that. I'm thinking about that space.
He's a tricky one, because almost part of his I want to say his charm, but it goes deep. Charisma is maybe the very peculiar charisma. It's like he embodied a peculiar zeitgeist, particularly which I felt to a certain extent, even though I never really, I wouldn't have considered myself swept away by it. Like I felt it in myself of like, it's like on the one hand, there's this sense of this traditional kind of honorable masculinity ideal, but at the same time he's this sort of tremulous professor, and it's like, and I think a lot of young men liked that, him putting those two things together, where on the one hand he's like, he's you know what I'm trying to say, like he combines them together, and it's like, oh, is he more of this I always want to think I have to use the MBTI language. I cannot get my I need to practice the socionics so that I can converse with people more. But
I could speak that. I can speak the Myers-Briggs language.
Yeah. But anyway, you know, on the one hand, he's like more of this mountain mover, but then he's also, so it's just interesting with him in general. The thing I wanted to mention though was Wittgenstein is maybe a better example, less controversial example.
We both can clearly see he's
but it's like you have this coherent vision, so he's trying to change, and that's exactly what happened, where is he basically came into the college, and people just sort of formed around him. They always have young men following them around. I don't know why. I feel like I see that. I can't think of examples off the top of my head, so maybe I should eat my words. But Wittgenstein, I mean, he just naturally, like, young men kind of gathered around him and sort of were emulating him, dressing the same way as him, and so it's very interesting charisma. But with the Delta, the argument would be that, like you were saying, they're explicitly not trying to change things around them in the same way. They're just, I'm going to be me. And by virtue of, I mean, sort of the mocking stereotypical version of it, I think, is that if we all just, if you develop your own inner sincerity, then everything else will magically fall into place. It's difficult for me to talk about it without me making fun of it, because I do not think that way. At least I don't think that way. We need to talk about your typing of me in a bit.
I know we need to talk about that, and I'm very open to reconsidering.
Oh no.
What I would say about one thing I've seen from Deltas is there's this, as well as developing their sincerity of learning skills. Often what they say to me is, "Oh, I want to do something which helps people," and use it in a very sort of localized way. I want to help someone in in medicine, for instance. I want to learn skills to be capable and competent to do something of value in my environment, which is sort of an expression of my own inner potential to be a good person. And that kind of element, I think it's the.
I'm going to jump. So that's interesting. Let's jump into this, because I've been thinking about this ever since we had our talk last time. Because I actually think that was actually extremely insightful for me. Your typing of me as I think of it as INFP. I know it's crucial here, the difference, but you're shifting that typing, because as I've read more about that in the socionics types and things, and read about the people who are typed that way, I'm like, oh yeah, like I relate much more to that in the socionics descriptions than I do to the it's IEI versus EII, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. Ethical, intuitive, introvert versus intuitive, ethical, introvert. Okay. Like I definitely, so in the socionics descriptions, I definitely think that is a better typing. Also, I get to be the same type as Dostoevsky either way. So
exactly.
And I'm like, oh, I love Dostoevsky. I relate a lot to that. But the thing, sorry, I always go off track. But the thing I was trying to say was because it's like I'll see, there's like a dichotomy, because I know there's a part of me that, but I don't think it's the dominant side. And I think there was, I talked last time how I do think there's been a shift for me in my life that happened after the mission, and it involved a certain degree of personality shift. And it's also been mediated, I think, somewhat by my studying of typology, as I have tried to understand the opposite functions and almost to a certain extent tried to integrate them. so that there's almost like this duality, not like any kind of tension or anything, but like as you were describing, because it's like I'm talking, of course, about how, oh, the betas, they change everything around them. And on one level, there's a part of, not to toot my own horn, but on one level, I'm like, oh, because I do want to do that. And I too, people would say, I myself would say, I shouldn't be fake modest. I've changed things in the typology landscape through my videos. I've influenced things in that way. And I do. What's that?
Undeniably.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I shouldn't say, oh, thank you. I know it's true, but I don't want to be fake modest. But at the same, it's like I have that, but at the same time, like I also have a fear of that. It's very odd. It's like I really relish that, but at the same time, I'm always like, I never really want to accept it, and I'll come up with odd excuses to convince myself I haven't really been that influential, or so and so is praising me, but and I'll think to my people have come to me, whenever people come to me with proposals of, hey, do you want to work with me? I really like your work. Do you want to work with me on this project, which will be really influential and do these things? There's just this part of me that's like, no, I don't want to get involved in, I don't like business. Please don't pay me money. Please don't do anything. Like, I mean, I have my Patreon thing, which, it's like a hat on the street, but it's like a duality. I want to have this influence, but I also fear because I really enjoy that notion of being just completely honest with people and being direct with people. I don't want to be on this pedestal, but I also like it. So it's interesting. Also, I just want to note that the funniest thing to me was watching through our last interview. Somebody pointed it out in the comments where they're like, there's this one moment where I'm literally rambling about how I need to be true to myself and like I need to do what is right no matter what and everything. And I'm looking in the middle distance, right? Because I'm totally swept up in it. And you're sitting there just like, I need, because you're such a gentleman about it, right? You're like, I'm not going to press him or anything, but you're like, oh my goodness gracious, he's giving like this Dostoevsky speech or something, and he's like about how he's not that type. Is like, oh no, I've done it myself.
I'm very open to being wrong.
I know.
And but also, reading through your book, there is very little actually in the way of introverted ethics.
Right.
There's a lot of introverted logic. Now, there's a question there in terms of whether that's because of the demands of the book or that's because of your natural style. But I would also say for you, you also operate under the assumption, which I think is quite a reasonable assumption, that people tend to express their personality authentically through their natural writing style. Right. So I think there is definitely something there to talk about in terms of the decision in your writing to be so introverted logic based, to start off from founding principles, from which you then construct the entire typology system, which is the way I would have approached it as well. But I wouldn't have expected an EII to actually approach it that way. I would have expected them to approach it from their experiences with individual people, as you say, being caught up in the context rather than in the universalism.
Right. Yeah, and I specifically avoided, in a weird way, I specifically just naturally tried to avoid bringing myself into it. I mean, the most effusive I think I get is there's maybe a few places where I let it break through, but in the preface, I let myself be very sort of poetic. And I read it, by the way, and I'm a little embarrassed by how kind of sentimental I am, but it's genuine. I'm not taking it back in the preface. But yes, I tried to be my natural mode was, and I was definitely this way when I first started making videos, as anybody knows. They listen to that, and I talk like this with no emotion, and because I was trying to be, I just naturally was like, well, I want to be taken seriously, so I need to be professional. But also that's just how it came out naturally, because I'm being, TI, introverted logic. I'm trying to lay the things out. I'm trying to be very reasonable in order to but I think I've and it's I guess it's always been there to an extent, but I like to feel like I can connect with people on a very it's odd, you know. I feel like sometimes I actually have trouble feeling as connected with people as I'd like to. So I try to make up for it. I often feel like I'm sorry to make this a therapy session, but
No, it's not.
I'm it's like I'm it's like something that oh shoot, what's his name? The guy who played the Godfather.
Oh yeah, Marlon Brando.
Marlon Brando. It was very. I'm not saying I necessarily relate to him, but there's something very interesting he said in one of his interviews where he talks about how acting as like a survival mechanism and as a necessity. And he's talking with the interviewer, and he's like, well, we're acting right now because there's an audience over there, and we're like you're presenting yourself in a certain way. And I was like, that's how it often feels, where I feel like I am acting myself. And that's not totally true because it's spontaneous, but it's like like I try to make up for the fact that I feel like I'm capable of presenting myself in a way that people would like. I try to make up for the potential inherent dishonesty in that by being as vulnerable as possible, and in some sense showing my trying to overcome any sense of cowardice by being willing to just say, well, if I'm afraid that he'll think worse of me for saying such, that's not quite it though, because I don't want to offend people, and I also do have a fear of like genuinely offending people, and I don't know, I'm just going to ramble about myself for a bit, but
also there's a huge amount of earnestness there, but at the same time this idea of us actually being, we can't escape from the idea that when we're in public we are acting according to some kind of image.
Yes.
And we try and make that, and the idea certainly with a lot of beta NF, so ENFJs, INFJs, they contrary to what some people may think, they're not out there just to sort of lie to you. It's more for them, it's about, yes, they see things in terms of a certain image that they want to express and have validated, and sometimes don't have a very good sense of the stability of themselves within the image they can create, and they get a bit carried away, almost fake it until they make it. But what really motivates them is being able to authentically self-express.
Yes.
The idea of actually taking an aspect which is very entirely true of themselves, expressing that to the universe, to the audience,
in a way that other people will understand it, and I'll know that, like there's a passage in one thing that I just do not personally understand on, like, I've become more open to it because I've kind of tried to integrate other aspects of myself, I suppose. But in Camus' The Stranger, where he ends it with the stranger saying nothing, it's something along the lines of, like, he didn't say it this way, but nothing would be more glorious to me. Like, the last thing I want is to stand on a podium and have everybody like screaming at me and you know, completely misunderstanding me. Like, he wanted that break, which I think is very Delta in the way we've described it. This where I am the individual and no one can understand me. And I remember reading that and being like, what the heck are you talking about? Like, what? That's horror. That's awful. Like, I want them to I want to reach them and have them feel to understand what I am and what they're doing, and I want them to all realize how wrong they are. Like, it's so, the notion of that it's like that doesn't resonate me with on an immediate level. That's like
it makes you think a bit of Taylor Swift.
How so?
No, because Taylor Swift, this is someone who, well, the vast majority of her songs are about about relationships with other people. Yes. But what a secondary theme has developed as a result of her interaction with the public And this is the idea of a reputation that's been created around her, which is not true, which has been misunderstood.
Right.
This idea of actually many especially even Delta introverts, the ones which are least inclined towards extroverted feeling, they actually have this difficulty about being misunderstood, or at least willfully misunderstood.
Right.
And the idea of them, they're not inclined to create an image, something of clarity to communicate. They are, in my parlance, integrity-seeking types.
Right.
So it's all the mess, whatever that mess is, all the contextualism, as it were. That's what they will relate when they're talked to. Yeah. So people can then take from that and sort of run away with a false impression, and they can be almost very negatively affected when then a complete misunderstanding of their intentions is then put into the public sphere, which was basically what reputation is about. Taylor Swift's intentions are not as reported, and she wanted to almost, talk about that or explore that in her Reputation album. And then because what she often would do is, one, it's about personal relationships. People assumed, you're taking out vengeance on these people by writing about them, singing about them, but also you have a sort of weird, sort of overly sort of confessional style when you're actually in front of your fans. You just open up, you show your insecurities. It doesn't just comes across as a bit of almost like a therapy session rather than been photoshopped for the audience to take and receive and take something away from.
Right.
And that sort of that sort of Delta introvert in a very sort of public space, and then how they actually interact with that and some of the complexities that can come as a result.
The confessional notion, I think, is very spot on, and I think you mentioned that in the personality database profile. I think that is very true. That's very interesting.
I identified something there which I typically relate as being a very much an EII sort of tendency.
Sure.
Saying that, this book is very much leaning more towards introverted logic. So I'm still trying to think about what that could be. It could be that you're an IEI and you're simply, this is introverted feeling demonstrative, which is something which I know you talked a bit about in the book, the idea of the sub what's it called, auxiliary. The sub auxiliary, where the idea that there's, for people who haven't read the book yet, this idea that for every single one of your 4 valued functions, as it were, in your traditional stack, the inverse of it is the sub version of it, and that almost comes before, because what you're doing is you're converting it from what came before into the thing you value. So if you are introverted feeling as your dominant function, that would mean that you'd have as your sub-dominant function would be extroverted feeling. So you're moving from extroverted feeling to introverted feeling. So on that idea, the demonstrative function would be your sub-auxiliary.
It's a notion that I should probably develop more, because it kind of came to me as an intuition while writing it. But I mean, if you follow that through further, I mean, basically what it sets up there is that the opposite types, like all of the other oppositions, blur into each other, and they do this because in some sense I'm saying that it's almost as though like an INFJ was an INFP in a past life, and they're trying to do something different now. And so really all the INFJs are still really INFPs, but they're trying to be INFJs, and all the INFPs are really INFJs. That would be the notion. I haven't thought more about it, but
when Pythagoras said that, that if you're a really, really bad person, you'll be reincarnated as a woman. What he really meant, you'll be reincarnated as an ESI or something like that.
Oh, I hadn't heard that quote, but I can believe it. So, oh gosh. Oh, Pythagoras, please, no. No, Pythagoras.
He had all these different kinds of beast degrading it until just under snail.
Just under snail, you will find. Oh gosh, it's kind of like in the. It's like the reverse. It's like the reverse of that in like the Gnostic Gospels, because there's so many of those, and they say so many different things, and it's like one of them has Jesus. It's almost like the opposite of that, or Jesus is like, well, yes, it would be better for them to be reborn as a man, which is exactly what I'll do, because I like it's like something like this. I butchered the joke. Never mind.
There are quite a number of these sort of gospels which didn't actually get into the canon, as it were. They were sort of discussed. I think there wasn't there. There's one of, I think there's one of Judas as well, which is also,
yes, I haven't read that one.
No.
I think that one, somebody described it as like a bad fan fiction about Judas and Jesus, which, because the plot of it is I think that's the one where it's like, oh, Judas was really acting under orders or something like this, which is a very interesting thing for, I'm sure Jung talked about that at some point, because it just feels like something Jung would be fascinated by. But but I actually wanted to, I didn't know if, I don't know how to phrase this, but could you talk more about my book so that I can feel I'm making a dumb joke that I couldn't think of anything specific, and I didn't want to just say, like, could you talk about my book? But I'm just fascinated to hear what people think of it when they read it, and just hearing you saying, okay, I see the introverted logic. That's just fascinating to me, because I want to know, I want to see myself reflected in other people and see what I see.
So what I meant by that is, you start off with a framing of what each function is, cognitive function is, how that comes about, and also then what you then do is you have a chapter dedicated to a certain idea, which is then brought to, say, masculinity, femininity, and then you put these ideas together to then build up the more complex theory until you finally get to the type level. So you get to cognitive function up through these axes, masculinity, femininity, to the four essentially quadras, as it were, and then you go into different levels of type after having explored the structure of consciousness and unconsciousness. I think it's very interesting as well how you proposed that the dominant function is actually, although it's not unconscious, it's almost perceived as unconscious, executed in an unconscious way, and it almost like it's the whiteboard upon which things are written.
Yes,
almost, and I feel that makes so much sense. And even on myself, when I'm thinking of, okay, is extroverted intuition very clear to me when I'm making my decisions? I don't actually think so. But when I look at what I've been doing and how I've been doing things, yes, I can see extroverted intuition absolutely. So, whereas I see myself engaging with introverted thinking and extroverted feeling a lot more. And it's me, certainly when I was younger, using too much introverted thinking, then becoming more inclined to use extroverted feeling.
It's like it poses more problems for you. And that I mean, that's normally that's how I would describe myself in terms of the extroverted feeling, introverted thinking, of this dichotomy between, do I be totally honest with people, or do I glaze things over? Whereas with at least my perception of the perception, that was a silly phrase, of the perception axes, it doesn't pose problems for me. It just sort of happens. And I know I'm not the first person to propose that notion, but it's one of those things that I'm sure I read online somewhere, and there's some very intelligent commenter on Reddit someplace who deserves the credit, but I'm the one who wrote it in the book. So,
that's how it works, isn't it?
That's how it works. Yeah.
We're all sort of, we're all, clever people, the ones who bring together their influences in the combination and shows how it fits together.
Yes.
Alstra for socionics did. She's a product of all these other ideas flowing into her.
Yes.
And same thing with Jung, going further back. I think my friend Andrew, Andrew Joynton, I think he put together a whole map showing how the different ideas influence one another. This whole tree of influences going into eventually getting to socionics, but also Myers-Briggs.
Oh, that's interesting. Like a genealogy of ideas.
Yes, exactly.
I'd be very curious to see that sheet if he has it around, but it's not essential.
I'll send it to you. When I get it, I'll send it. When I find it again, I'll send it.
Yeah, sure.
Interesting one. Oh, that makes me thinking about Nietzsche. Nietzsche's an interesting one because I know you use Nietzsche, you had Marx as well, and it had them sort
Yeah.
of the vanguard of a monarchic style. I find that
Yes.
interesting because I've spoken to a lot of, at least in the sociologics community, a lot of betas feel that Nietzsche's almost like the philosopher of a beta quadra in a way.
Yeah. I think we talked about that a bit
Yeah.
about last time too. I and I have wondered a bit about that. Because going on the notion that I am in fact a beta. I want to say beta,
You can say beta. That's fine. It's just when I made this whole joke about someone typed me as a beta.
Oh, really?
This other Russian school thing in Kaliningrad, and I made this whole joke that I'm the master beta. But also, so I tend to stick to the British pronunciation for my own good.
I shouldn't laugh as hard as I am at that. It's such a silly joke.
Well, there's plenty of sex in this book as well.
Yes, there is.
It's
quite a salacious text. I know, boy, oh boy. You'll probably be surprised by the other thing that I thought was funny, and I was slightly like, oh, maybe should I fix that? No, I won't fix that. Is if you go to the bibliography, like there's Jung quotes, like references to Jung's books are like maybe this long. References to Nietzsche are like this long. I reference Nietzsche, and part of that is because I'm referencing different works by Nietzsche, so it's not an exact comparison. But I'm pretty sure, I don't know, I think they're about equal. But anyway, my point is
a good amount.
I oddly enough relate to, I always have to say oddly enough, because I know someone's going to be like, didn't Nietzsche like write a defense of slavery or something? And I'm like, I don't relate to that. I'm not associated with that, but maybe please don't. But
you can't escape from that. Everyone has done something.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't actually. Yeah, but it's I don't know. I do. But I mean, the way that I've constructed it, I mean, I don't know, maybe it just comes down to my intuition, but I'm like, no, he just feels like a paradigmatic INTJ to me.
Right.
But and that's reading him, it comes up a lot, and maybe I ought to make a video making my case for that, just so that it's out in the open. Because I feel like I could go through, but I can't do it in my head right now.
That's fine. But also what I say is the paradigmatic INTJ, at least for a lot of the sociologics world, could be someone like Karl Popper, who you then UNTP.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I associate his approach through the falsifiability and stuff, because I'm thinking in terms of he has this indirectness and stuff. I will also freely admit on the record that and anybody who knows a bit of my own idea history will know this. I'm definitely influenced by the typings provided by IDR Labs. But I have thought a lot about them, but that definitely is where I draw. So that's very interesting. I've never heard anybody
explain why I think that. So
what's that?
My thinking around it is, rather than it being necessarily indirectness, which completely agree that is. I think you coined exactly as I think as well, the difference between, say, extroverted sensation and extroverted intuition.
Yeah.
And that directness versus indirectness. I would have thought with Karl Popper, the idea of the falsifiability is the idea of you need a really good reason to entertain this idea at all. And if it's not, if I can't disprove it, then it's not even worth considering. And that, to me, that is such well, this idea of no versus yes is different.
Right. He was very and that is a thing about him that points towards a more INTJ thing, is he not to stereotype, but I don't know if cantankerous is the word, but he's very forceful.
He's very prickly.
Very prickly. I
Very
mean,
prickly.
my blood boils when I read him attacking Plato, even though I know he's totally justified in a lot of his attacks. I'm like, but he's just like, why has nobody talked about this? Like, this is, you know, very prickly.
So I would have thought that was, so I guess the thing is, when I think of people like Nietzsche, people like Marx, I see that almost romanticizing of the purpose, the destiny they're going through, in almost a quite dramatic, almost beta-ish way, as it were. When I think of how, at least in sociologics, how a gamma uses introverted intuition, it takes all the romanticism out of it. It takes all this idea that this is the great idea. Instead, it's, I can see how things are likely to turn out, and I'm looking at the facts to see what is probable and what's improbable. I'm going to cut out anything which I think is irrelevant. And that idea, it's irrelevant, is never going to happen. The idea of the idea being like the critic, because they're deliberately, the emphasis is not on finding the great destiny. It's more instead, no, it's cutting out every single irrelevant possibility, everything which is never going to work, and you're a stupid person to even think that's going to work.
Yes. You know, and so the interesting thing is, I think it's interesting that Popper seems to have been more like that in person, that where he doesn't want to have to put up with stupid people. He's very irritated by this, and yet he writes The Open Society and Its Enemies, where his problem with Plato is that he betrayed Socrates, who wanted to have free range of ideas, and yet at the same time, so this isn't really so much about Popper's type, but I think in my mind that was a part of why, okay, so he's a prickly ENTP or INTP maybe, but either way, it's kind of interesting that he has this I think where he's like, no, that is not a useful idea. We have to falsify that and script this away and scrape that away and scrape that away. And it's like, well, but isn't this is no open society? Can't we have silly ideas too? You know, he's like, shut up.
and also these sorts of people, I personally have a great deal of trouble with. I can't even talk. I had so I went on a sort of tour of Egypt with, and he was very, very clearly an INTJ, this guy, in a relationship with I think married to an ESFP as well. It was very it was very much work for them, but for me, even discussing say sociologics, I realized no, he's not even interested. Well, first of all, he wouldn't want to, because unless I can show him that it's falsifiable. But I need to actually get him to give me enough of a chance to even show that it's falsifiable for me even to discuss it, so that he can disprove it. And I realize he won't even give me a chance in that, because he's not even open enough to giving me that possibility. So very narrowing down. And this idea of no, the way I see it, when it comes to, I know you use no versus yes in a very different way in your book. The most yes types are going to be the extroverted alphas. And the most no types, the introverted gammas. And it's like, you're not including me in this. You're
very
not
exclusive.
Yes. But also not exclusive in terms of an exclusive belonging. It's just, you're not doing this to me. You're not putting me into this. You're not pulling the wool over my eyes with your fear. You're not making me dance to your tune. You're not going to put a mask in my face.
You're not going to cast your ritual spells, brain witch. You're not over me. You're not going to spin your webs. The type who would have hated Socrates, who gets very angry with Socrates. I always thought in the Republic, and maybe this isn't but there's kind of an interesting, that first discussion between Socrates and, I can't remember his name, Thrasymachus, or however you pronounce it, where Thrasymachus, Socrates is always like, I'm going to, obviously, because of the way it's written, he's like leading people along to an argument. So but the idea of him trying to communicate with a person versus Thrasymachus, who's like, I don't want to have a dialogue. I just want to word vomit on you and tell you what I'm thinking. And then if you're smart, you will agree with me. And if you're stupid, you won't. But Socrates is like, oh, I'm going to play around, kind of like at least what Derrida purports to do, but no one can understand Derrida, so no one can check if that is what he's doing.
Yeah.
Was you? Yeah,
And
he
you put him
is
as a
interesting.
delta. You put him as a.
I do.
Yeah. I need to remember.
I take him as an ENFP. I think he's I think he's a good example of an ENFP philosopher. Because he's well, that's maybe another discussion, but it's kind of like Derrida, where he'll take one little thing that you say that in your opinion is irrelevant, and it in some cases I think genuinely is Derrida's out of line, but he's taking this one little thing and making this whole thing out of it, and like kind of weaving it and unraveling your argument. And I feel like there's times when people really did feel like that's what Socrates was doing, that he was just being a sophist, like, and just trying to unravel the argument. It's like, but the soul of it is true. And it could be very frustrating for people. But
I also thought, I know you put him as, I think you put him down as an ENFJ. I thought that Erasmus.
Socrates? Or
no, not Socrates. No, I thought about Erasmus.
Oh, Erasmus, yeah.
I would have put him as an ENFP in the Poetic system. So there's some sort of almost a swapping across, as it were, between how we type some of them.
Yeah, like with that is interesting. Because that would be a direct going across. Yeah, and like with the Karl Popper and being an INTJ or an ENTP, or typing me as an INFP versus an INFJ. So that's kind of interesting.
I think there's something to explore. Because I got the feeling from reading the anarchic one, we didn't really like them very much.
Dang it! I was trying so hard. Oh gosh, I got that same problem when doing my ENFP revisit, where I went off on, I didn't intend it to be a rant, but I was like talking about a story because I was trying to just explain why I was frustrated. That's really interesting. You got that impression. Now, what was it specifically? I don't know if you're able to articulate it.
I think it was the ratio of talking about their positives to going towards their negatives.
Dang it.
And I think it was when you're talking about how you focus on a lot of it was the two key effects, and by effects you mean flaws, and one of them was that they have an idea of every person from talking to one person.
Yes.
Or Mark Twain, the idea of sort of looking within himself, and within myself is every other person, so I can understand everything about. So I don't need someone else, some philosopher, to tell me about people, because I know myself and I'm like everyone else.
That quote still bothers me. Because I was trying to pin. I think you're right. I think I'm. Yeah, which in some senses may be a quirk of the book, that one can sort of figure out what I at least assume my own type is from reading the book and seeing where things might be skewed. But that quote is like one of the best encapsulations of one of the things that has bugged me in people who I tend to type as more delta, where at least how I see it, where it's like they will, from my perspective, it will feel as though, they will generalize, and they'll be like, oh, I understand. Like another example of it is with say ESTJs or ISTJs, where I think I've used this example before, where in church, people who I look back now and I'm like, they were probably STJ. I don't know for sure, but they probably were. And they would get up and they would talk, and they were the ones who would have much more of a willingness to believe in the original sin kind of notion, and to sort of get almost like a weird sense of power from admitting that, like, and they would emphasize how, or they would just assume, you're this young man, you were like me when I was a kid, and we all know that young men are irresponsible and get themselves into trouble because they're stupid. And I hated that. I hated that so much. I'm like, I am specifically trying to be a different kind of person from the normal. I don't want to be like you when you were a moron. And I obviously, you see me wrong.
There are two things there which strike me. I'll talk about the second thing which struck me first.
Oh, yes.
The idea of you, I'm trying to be someone other than normal.
Yes.
It's a lot more, I'd say, to beta than to delta.
Right.
The idea of standing out.
Yes.
But also, the first thing that struck me about that is my perception of deltas is almost close to the opposite.
Oh.
I would say that I would say from my experience of what I tend to type as delta, people who are almost anti-generalization, almost
Right.
I find it frustrating. They won't deal with any generalization, especially the extroverted delta.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
almost as if every single perspective is unique, and they want to hear out each individual perspective, and they are afraid to draw any simplifications or generalizations or norms
Yes.
about the human condition from that.
And now I'm feeling embarrassed because I absolutely agree with that. And I feel like maybe there's a contradiction in the way I describe them in the book. Because that's absolutely true. Because it's like on the other end, I will also get frustrated with that, where they are specifically trying to not general. It's almost like and I'm sure and I know that they get enraged. I shouldn't say enraged, but they get infuriated with me.
Privately disappointed.
Privately disappointed. Privately disappointed, concerned, disconcerted, with me doing in their minds what I probably just described like generalizing. It's almost like they generalize in the places where I don't want them to, and then they don't generalize where I don't want them to. And I hope there isn't a blatant contradiction in the book. I didn't think there was, but I know you're not pointing one out.
I wasn't sure because I know you were talking about, because I think I completely agree with the whole contextualism aspect.
Yeah.
But I wondered about that aspect when it came to describing delta, about, I say delta, the anarchist, about this idea that almost all people are the same. But I think you also, one of the reasons may have caused that, I think because you have that central fulcrum, as it were, simplex of, where alpha and gamma on either ends, and delta has to be some sort of blend between individualism and collectivism. Maybe that was where you fit in the almost the collectivist side of it, because they're in the process of traveling out from collectivism to individualism. They're in the shift there. So maybe that was the cause of it. So maybe it's not a contradiction, because it's just you're grappling with different ideas to one which I was.
Yeah. Well, I was trying. That's one of the things that I feel very strongly, but I always struggle to figure out how to articulate what's going on, because it's like I know I'm bothered by something these people who I know are or at least I'm very strongly inclined to think are delta, and it's like, but it's so difficult for me to catch it. And I was trying to there, and I think that's the closest I've gotten with that Mark Twain quote and other things where, and I associated a little bit with, I think also because I was just annoyed that he was like, I don't need to read philosophy. And I'm like, well, I'm a philosopher and I was hoping you'd support my dreams, Mark Twain, or whatever. But
also Hume saying, if it's metaphysical, commit it to the flames.
Yes. And I'm like, you get a pass, Hume, because I kind of like you for some reason. But I get annoyed when reading Hume too. It's sort of weird.
Yes. But, I'm wondering about Hume. I'm pretty sure he's an alpha. Pretty sure. But I'm not sure necessarily which one. And I think, the ones that I've boiled it down to, either ENTP, which you think ENTP.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just me not yet being willing to narrow down the possibility, but I'm wondering about ESFJ as another possibility. Because this struggle with cause and effect, and the idea that things are going to turn its way, and this is over empiricism around it.
So that he's that's an interesting idea. That
not sure.
Yeah. I'm still going to go with ENTP, but it's interesting you mentioned that, because for a while I was genuinely considering whether, because I also type, I don't know how controversial this is. I consider Zizek an ENTP as well.
No, I can see that. No, I'm swinging towards that viewpoint. I wonder if he's maybe ENFJ, but especially following his discussion with Jordan Peterson.
Right.
I'm really open to ENTP for him.
Yeah, but I was wondering for a bit whether or not he was actually just an statistically unlikely hyper-philosophical ESFJ. And I can't really articulate why I thought that. I don't think it's true, but I think because, and I think it's also because I've only ever listened to him in his later career, and I think maybe he's tried to embrace his FE more. But in all the things I've listened to, he would always be like, it's like he wanted to be, it's like, is this a chicken or in the egg? Is it that he's naturally subversive and likes telling dirty jokes or whatever he puts it, and he's apologizing for that in his late years? Or is he actually trying to be subversive, but he's not quite breaking out of it fully? And I think it's the former one, but it's that interesting dichotomy with ENTP and ESFJ that's
I see them as very similar types.
Yeah. And that's important to note, especially to break some of the stereotypes around it, because meeting with ESFJs, you can see that that NE in there, how you know they and especially that notion of, I think there's a lot of ESFJs who specifically try to sort of come across as subversive, and I'm not, you know, traditional conservative or whatever, and I'm going to bake you cookies, but I'll bake you cookies with anarchy symbols on them, or that's a dumb joke, but you know, yeah, it's interesting.
That's another point you pointed at there, that the tying of introverted sensation to conservatism, I thought was an interesting one, because I know you called the ISFJ, I think it was what's it called?
Conscience.
The conscience, yes. So very much doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Being quite sort of traditionally understood and set, and use the imagery for introverted sensation of the mountain.
Right.
And the idea that, you know, in its receptiveness, it is unmoving.
Yes.
I also kind of like, because I know ISFJs can be very stubborn.
Yes.
Very, very stubborn. But it's a stubbornness in response to changing of how things are done, because they found their comfort zone, and they managed to make sense of that comfort zone, and suddenly having to change up the processes is a big strain on their acting.
Specifically, I think specifically when things are changing and they're like, I do not see any sufficient reason for this changing. Like, what we already knew that what we had worked, and now you're coming in with your newfangled ideas, and you want to change to those ideas just because you are bored easily and want something new. And I have no patience for that. Like, that's kind of how I see it, as a way to describe it. And because one of the interesting things when first studying SI and stuff, when first getting into it, is the temptation is to try to, and in some sense it's a necessity because you have to understand things via analogy, but to try to make the over hasty political analogy when you're first learning these things of saying, oh, the ISFJs, those are all the conservative people who bug me. Or something like people will assume that, and I've seen that online where, and I think it was more prominent years ago, but the idea being that people wanting to link typology up with political analogies, but they're not actually commensurate, mostly because the political analogies are themselves way oversimplified and don't actually describe the situation. They assume, oh, you are conservative because you don't like change. It's very simple.
Yeah.
And it's kind of true, but there's this whole other side to it. And
because I'm looking at, if I were to look at, say, I don't know, the landscape of politicians or people who are falling into the camp. So I think of, say, Republicans. I can identify a large number, at least based on my typings, of gammas. And actually, I can see quite a few more ISFJs, and this is how I type ISFJ, almost within the Democratic Party. Normally in more local government, rather getting too high up in sort of a big, more global aspect. But I think there's this, where their stubbornness comes in, I think, is in having to taking facts to change how they're doing things in terms of a practical way. Right, we're implementing this new system for doing things. You have to learn this new system.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm used to doing it in this way now. There's too much information for me to tricks. It's sort of learning new tricks, old dogs, new tricks. But I'm thinking in terms of new ideas and possibilities, and also sort of the idea of being exposed to new influences outside of their comfort zone, in a way which, no, we're not expected to do this for efficiency and to improve how things are working. It's more, what have you ever considered this idea?
Right.
I'm very, very open to that. I think if they weren't open to that, I don't think they'd work with an ENTP.
Right. I apologize. I got slightly distracted because I suddenly realized that there is an unintentional pun in my book where I describe SI as a mountain, and then I describe the ENTJ as the mountain mover. And I was
goodness,
I was so delighted by this that I didn't. I was I glazed out at the last 5 seconds of you talking, but I thought you'd be delighted by that. I was like, oh, this is so great. This works so perfectly. I didn't realize it till now. Anyway, I'm sorry.
but that is kind of the point. They sort of in this way of doing it. They're used to it. They built their ecosystem around this.
Yes.
And so if someone's shoveling it all up,
the ENTJ comes in.
Highway.
Yeah.
And it's that disruption. It's disruption of the calm in the moment. I think rather than this is the way it's all done. These are the traditions, and these are going, and the future could be bad. Because I think they are. I think they are open-minded people who are stubborn about the calm being disrupted, the boat being overturned. In that,
I think they want to do things in a calm, slower manner. They want to do things in a methodical. It's almost like the peacefulness is the most important thing. Because it's interesting because my mom, who I would type as an ISFJ, she was asked or assigned to in our church. There's a library.
Yeah.
So sorry, but there's and it has all of these books and materials and like files and things like this, and this probably isn't true, but I like to imagine that the person who was in charge of it before was like an ENFP or somebody who did not organize anything, but like knew where everything was, but like things were just like scattered all over, and like the books were here, and it's like, oh, I remember where this thing is, and then but like things would get lost and stuff. Like it was just not organized well at all. And then my mom comes in and it's like, okay. And she like took like a weekend and like practically camped in that room as she meticulously organized everything. And I think it's still organized like that to this day. She's not the librarian anymore, but I mean, just rendered this public service, man, like made it so everything is very easily found. And I'm going to put these, and would talk with me about, here's how I'm going to do this, because she's kind of running it through her mind. And so she's changing a lot. Like it's kind of a whole overhaul of the whole indexing system and everything. Yeah. But she was doing it in this very slow and very like not loud manner. Like it was on a weekend when people wouldn't be there, and was doing it herself and was doing it very quietly. Whereas, and
that makes sense.
Yeah, it's just interesting.
But because that makes sense in terms of about introverted logic. It's static.
Yes.
Similar with the betas. If introverted logic changes, it doesn't just change slightly; it changes completely.
Yes.
It's a complete overhaul. So the creation of the system has to be, a static change.
Yes, it all comes in at once, and I will now organize it all into the system. Whereas TE, with say they want things to be a little more fluid because they want to accomplish things. So they're like, well, what is it we're trying to do here? What is it that will benefit, the church branch the most? Like which books are most important? Whereas for her, it was like, no, I want everything to be organized according to categories and everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
T is annoying because they don't want things to be set in categories. They want to be constantly constantly updating it based on what's
Yes.
okay. In this season now the market is suggesting that these are the main books. You're going to take these books out of your structure and put them up at the front.
Yes.
Yes. I've ruined my structure. These go in here.
You can't keep changing these categories. Yeah.
We're gonna make more money. Come on, make more money here.
Yes. Yes.
And so and that's disruptive. It's ongoing disruption.
Yeah.
Of the stability which the ISFJ has created using their introverted thinking and their mobilizing.
It's capitalism.
Yeah.
Broadly considered, just kind of linking back to your observation that in your opinion, you see more Republican politicians as gamma, and obviously didn't mean to get into culture wars here, but obviously there's this sort of there's the zeitgeist or the trend of the not trusting capitalism in the Democratic parties, and it's like, that's probably, you do definitely see more TE, I think, in the Republican group, because it's like, we want to make things freaking better and we need things to be moving and to, it's interesting.
It's not the case in UK. I've noticed that in the UK, well, especially now, I think because, Boris, I think Boris is very much an alpha.
Okay.
He's got alphas around him as well. Although the previous government with Theresa May was far more gamma, and you can see the difference there. And before David Cameron beta. So the Conservatives, the thing is, they're not really entirely consistent in their ideology. Not even quite sure what it is some of the time. But at least when it comes to America, I think it is quite clear what each group is standing for. I do see a lot of gammas in the Republicans.
Yeah.
I do see a lot more betas amongst the Democrats, and also some alphas. If I were to look at Canada, I think they got the Liberal Party. Well, Justin Trudeau, I think, is an ESFJ. Some may call it an ESFJ, but definitely extroverted feeling. Australia as well, got, I think, an ENFJ, Jacinda Ardern. There's a lot more extroverted feeling in those centre-left, as it were, politicians. And I think there's more emotive communication there. I think there's more this idea of going up there and speaking some sort of authentic feeling that gets people rallied, whereas often the Conservative side don't often do that. They didn't do that until Trump came along, because he's a beta in the Conservative audience.
Yes.
And the Conservative, he's not really a Conservative. He's actually almost like would have been a Democrat before, and so he's speaking like a Democrat, even though he's been to Conservative. So it's interesting. You see sort of type interacting.
Yes, it's very interesting. I will just so you know, I'll probably at 5:04. Well, that's in my time, 5. So about 15 minutes. I'll probably need to hop off. But just so we have that in mind. But
what should we discuss in the time remaining?
Oh, the possibilities are endless.
I know.
We need to do this more often. This is very nice.
We could do one in the next few months. I mean,
sure.
A few years is too much. I think.
I think it's too much. I was bad about that. But because we talked before the COVID thing, and then COVID hit. Yeah, that's crazy to think about. But I remember thinking to myself, I need to talk with Jack, but I got caught up with the book and excuses and excuse. But there was something I wanted to ask. So one of the things going back to the book, so it's very interesting. I'll get kind of I've had two kinds of readers of the book. And I think it's just sort of two different audiences that I've kind of unintentionally. So there's the people who are very into. Oh, Tara, just a second. Oh, let me plug my computer in real quick so it doesn't go out on us. Sorry to mess up the interview. Sorry, I should have had that beforehand. But anyway, the two kinds of readers. One audience is usually the people who are already very interested in personality typing and stuff, and that's the stuff they tend to focus on.
Yeah.
And then there's a smaller group of people who usually don't know as much about typology, and they're usually also my friends, and that's why they know about the book. But they latch on immediately to like, oh my gosh, he's talking about the I Ching, and he's talking about Buddhist philosophy, and he has this whole long like digression and shameless digression in the masculine and feminine chapter where he goes off about the ancient mariner and all this other stuff that I'm like, I can't.
Love the tentacles.
Yay! I'm so happy that you seem to have brought both of them together, because it was very important to me to sort of weave these different, like, I know it's sort of stereotypically new agey to be talking about the Indian, you know, Native American mythology and stuff, but it's just so fascinating to me, and so it's just interesting seeing the two different sides.
It's really important if we're talking about ideas which are universal importance, right? If we're doing universalizing, then we need to tap into more than just Western cultures. We need to see how these ideas perpetuate across different civilizations, and they do. They show up in very meaningful ways. So going into, say, Native American creation myth, going into I Ching, and this idea that you could almost look at the cognitive functions as 3 levels of frequency, whether that is the more solid or more broken frequency. That's the part I took the most time just to sit and really think through in terms of how this sort of comes together. I was trying to think about, okay, the idea of extrovert intuition as being something which starts from receptivity and then suddenly has a rush of energy at the last minute, whereas fire is a bit more consistent but lacks much of an internal weight or structure. Whereas water is the opposite; it's all weight and it's no movement. And I was trying to think about, okay, what does the first row really mean? What does the second row really mean? What does the third row really mean? And just trying to sort of put that together. I've got ideas about, okay, so the middle one's about substance. The top one is about sort of like movement. It's like how if it's actually moving or not, it's quite still. And the bottom one's more about almost solidity or firmness or almost assertiveness, you could say. They're trying to push things and change things. And
it's almost like this is just an idea that occurs to me now, almost like a seed. You know, you start with the seed at the bottom, the bottom rung, and then you have the substance of it, which is what kind of comes up, and then you have what it tries to accomplish with the flower opening up, or something along those lines, which is how I organized. You know, you start with the sensation, and then I changed it a bit from how Jung did it, because he would always describe it as you start with sensation, and then I think the thinking, and then feeling, and then intuition at the end. And I switched that around. And
evaporation, or it was evaporation for the reverse, but the natural cycle was sacrifice, and then
bring down the rain. Which you could take my symbolism there how you will. But of the quote natural cycle, the older cycle, there's a lot of ideas that I throw out there that I'm like, okay, it's okay for me to just throw it out there, and in later works I might try to develop it more. But I was in kind of, I call it Jung mode, where I'm exploring a lot of different things and throwing out ideas, and I was very excited with sort of my what would you call it? My psychological history thing that was based on Nietzsche's slave master morality thing. I was like, I see the truth all over, you know. I was very excited about that. Still am. I think it's really interesting, but
the crown of it was Orthodox Christianity.
Yes, I think that's how I described it. That was my way of trying to say, of like, I think I was in a footnote where I'm like, so Nietzsche, of course, described this as the full fulfillment of the slave morality of Judaism, and I prefer to think of it as the crown of a beautiful development. So, you know, because
different perspectives there, of course.
What's that?
Different perspectives on
very different perspectives. Yes. Why do I like Nietzsche? I don't know. Well, I know why.
It's a love-hate relationship, isn't it?
It's a fascinating relationship between me and him. I don't think he minds. He said, I think he wrote in Ecce Homo, I think. I'd need to look up the reference, but he a remarkable statement, by the way, where it's this little passage about where he talks about Christianity, where he says, the most serious Christians have always been well disposed towards me, which is a remarkable statement from the author of the Antichrist, where it's like, and it's like, why would he say that? And I get very frustrated. What's that?
You're not bad for a Christian.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I take it as a great compliment from. But I think there was some interesting stuff going on there in the background. Nietzsche is not an open book for sure. So he says some very interesting things about his very interesting relationship with Christianity. But obviously it's not like he was a secret Christian or anything, because I have seen, it's really interesting, I have seen people going as far as to try to make an argument along those lines that he was like kind of like a secretly like a Kierkegaard or something, and I'm like, no, even though a fanciful overly happy Christian part of myself would love to be able to make that argument, that you can't go that far. That's just not true. But
I mean, he certainly had a complicated relationship with Christianity growing up, but that that doesn't mean he actually is one now, unless of course you take some sort of Petersonian viewpoint, which you're acting out the tenets of Christianity even if you don't have the faith, so you're acting Christian even if you don't.
Sure, exactly. Yes. Which I think is kind of an argument that he takes from Nietzsche, but then you can turn it on Nietzsche of, well, you thought that you were trying to initiate a new morality, but you really weren't. But I actually wrote one of the other books that I was kind of, because I don't know if you saw, I actually did a translation of the preface to Thus Spake Zarathustra. I don't know if you ever noticed that. Oh yeah, I listening to it again, I realized it's very strange. Just as another tangent, I don't know if there's something off with like my perception of sound or something, but I will record something. I will painstakingly try to make sure the audio sounds good. And like, because I know that's been a problem in the past. And then I put it up, I'm like, okay, this is the best I can do. And then I'll listen to it the first time and be like, okay, this sounds good. And then I listen to it a few months later and I'm like, this is garbage. What have I done? Like, I don't know what it is. And I don't know if other people have the same problem. Like, I know some people do. I feel bad. But anyway, I think the audio on the Thus Spake Zarathustra has some problems with it. It's very tinny. And I apologize for that in advance. But the point is, I did my own translation. I cannot speak German, but if you give me a dictionary and a few hours, I can, do a few lines, along with a great love of Nietzsche. Sorry. Yes.
Where can we access it?
Oh, it should just be on my channel. If you just type in Michael Pierce Thus Spake Zarathustra, I'm sure it'll come up. It's the one that has the yellowish thumbnail. It's got a sort of abstract figure. I'm very proud of it. I would like someday to, I was trying to translate it, not just straight, because there's fine translations from other people, but I wanted to translate it to give it a rhythm. I wanted to give it almost a sing-songy sense to it, to better capture the fact that Nietzsche often described it as being like music.
It's like an epic poem almost.
Yes. Yeah. So I kind of tried to give the sense of sort of free rhythm to it when I was reciting it. So that I would like to do the entire thing someday, at least the first 3 books of it. But I got off on that because I was also, before I started translating Zarathustra, I actually began work on a translation of the Antichrist, because I'm like, well, I'm a diehard Christian, and I love Nietzsche, so it seems the only appropriate thing for me to do is, if I really love Nietzsche, I need to hit the spot where it'll hurt me the most. So I'm going to translate this book, and I was like writing copious footnotes, like in order to understand, and it was like going to be an annotated edition. Maybe I'll finish it someday, but I got distracted by Thus Spake Zarathustra. But I was writing an introduction for it, which I'm very proud of, but I haven't finished. I don't know why I went into that, but That
No.
might be the next project I come out with sometime.
No, I'm looking forward to it, and I would love to read your well, I say listen to your translation of that.
Yeah, I'd be curious what you think.
I would like to. Need to get the time to do it, but I'll try to.
Oh, sure.
I try to think, what else can we plug from you in the time we have left?
Yes. Well, I have a book, I have a channel, and that is the book. I guess we can put links in the description. If you go, I mean, if you go to my channel website, or not website, the channel site, you know, like if you go to almost any of my videos, actually, you'll see in the description, I link to the Amazon account and also where you can get the ebook version. I specifically wanted to make everything cheap because that's just a quirk of mine. I have no TE. I am not. My father looked at me funny when I told him what I was planning on pricing the book, that I'm going to have $8, baby. I want people to talk about that in the future. That's my real motivation. It's an FE motivation. Sorry, what am I talking about? You can get it as an ebook, which is definitely a better option if you're not in the US, because you don't want to pay all that for Amazon shipping. But and when you get the ebook, it's a very bare bones system. Basically, you're paying me for it on PayPal. I will automatically get the automated receipt, and I will send you the PDF by email as soon as possible. So kind of makeshift, but just so you know, that's how it works. But I think that's everything I have to plug.
Do you have enough time just for a few questions from the audience, maybe?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, guys, any questions for Michael? Anything you want? Let's see. Fate's asking, are any hard copies of the book? Yeah, there are hard copies of the book.
Yes.
I've got one. Yeah.
He has one. You get those on Amazon. They are self-published by Amazon.
What's also being asked? Oh, what type is Michael? I'm telling you now, I'm not sure. I'm less confident than I was, which is a good thing. But I would say, if we
said the ENTP.
No, you're not. You're definitely introverted. You're definitely intuitive, and also extroverted logic is clearly in a very weak position. And well, it's either very weak or it's very unvalued.
Yes.
I mean, I'd say LII is also a possibility.
Logical, intuitive, introvert. Well, that is what a lot of people typed me originally, and there is an argument to be made there. I do not deny.
And I should say I am open to IAI as well. I think that definitely IAI is definitely one worth considering. I think it's definitely a very TI oriented, intuitive, introverted person. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And
I type myself as INFJ, and sorry, didn't mean to talk over you. I was just saying I type myself as INFJ as a matter of record, but I have found Jack's approach very, very interesting and insightful. So I think there's stuff to be made there. Michael mentioned future projects, maybe a Motes and Beams too. Oh, I don't know about that. But
could be.
Maybe down the line. I'm sure. Hi Nicker. Hi Nick. Sorry, I've been emailing him. So I just suddenly, hey, he's here. Hello. You get to hear my voice saying hi to you. Anyway, I don't know about a Motes and Beams too. I was trying to write Motes and Beams so that it would be a complete work and I could set it to rest, but it's certainly a possibility. Not one I've had in mind at the moment, but so.
If there were any ideas you'd like to write more on in the future, what might they be? Originally, translations.
Oh, there's about Nietzsche. I would like at some point to do a translation or just a book about Nietzsche. I know there's many books on him, but there's also a lot of philosophical ideas that I've made some videos on quantum mechanics as well. I think a lot of people don't know about some of my more recent stuff. Since writing the book, I've branched out to a lot of other areas more, but But most people know my channel for MBTI, so that's expected. But I would like to. I mean, I'm hoping to get an MA in philosophy and then move on to a PhD and enter that world. But I do have a lot of I have a lot of philosophical ideas. I'd like to write a book about consciousness and the problem of consciousness, but I'd like it to be very different from the stuff that's been coming out now. But probably the project that has had the most work put into it is the stuff about Nietzsche, the most concrete work. But I don't know. But you should expect there to be more books in the future. But I don't know exactly what they will be on. But I have lots of ideas.
Fantastic. One last question, Michael. Just the last one. Okay. Any new project with new video descriptions of the types, an update on your new understanding of the 16 types? It's in the book already, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, the book is probably the because I go through all of the different types in the end of the book, and I try to give them a good thorough and everything in the book ends up relating into that. I don't want to get people excited or anything because I haven't seriously considered it, but I did think about maybe doing a different kind of series where it was more relaxed, maybe more like a podcast where I just talked about stories of different people I've met who I think have demonstrated different parts of types and things. I thought that might be interesting, but don't get excited because I've been thinking about it for a while and still haven't done anything. Partly because I think I've become self-conscious about my difficulty in when I don't have a script, I tend to get nervous of, oh, should I have said that? And then I go off on topic over here. And then listening to our interview, I'm sure other people don't feel this way, but listening to our previous interview, I was like, I make the point. I know the point you're about to make, Michael. Make it. No, you're going off track. You were about to say it.
But that's fine. The thing is, when people are highly insightful, highly intelligent people, highly well-read people, you might not get the answer you were looking for, but you get something even more interesting. And that's what it's like when you're looking for something, you find something else.
That is very, thank you. I do appreciate that genuinely. I think that is very true. That is very true of you. Intelligent, insightful. See, I have to deflect it. Otherwise I'll feel like I'm being greedy and soaking it up. I have to make sure I'm deflecting it to the other person. Yeah.
Well, Michael, I know you've got to get going, but it's been an absolute delight to talk with you again, to read your book as well and get
Thank you.
a thorough immersion into your ideas and your thought processes. It was truly wonderful today, and I really appreciate it.
Jack, it's a real pleasure talking with you. I wish we'd done it sooner. But thank you so much for proposing this. This was really fun.
Well, we'll get something in the diary for in a few months' time, maybe. So
yes.
we have a longer gap. I'll email you after, but I know you've got to get going. But
yes,
speak soon.
All right, thank you. I will. I don't know how we end this properly.
Thank you for coming, and thank you everyone for watching. All the best.